But we begin tonight with the continued efforts by a Trump-appointed judge to defy legal norms in order to show deference to the man who put her on the bench. Of course, I'm referring to one Judge Aileen Cannon, who for a third day now has decided to give Donald Trump and his lawyers a forum to put on his newest form of a reality show in his attempts to either throw out his federal classified documents case altogether or, at minimum, chip away at the heaping piles of evidence prosecutors will be able to use if a trial were ever to be scheduled. It is no surprise that Trump has filed motion after motion in this case. That is his right to do. But the fact that Cannon has been willing to entertain everyone ad nauseum, even when there is little legal or evidentiary basis, only further confirms the appearance that the delay is the point. Remember, there is still no trial date, thanks to Judge Cannon, which means there are no firm deadlines in place to resolve the remaining issues. In today's episode, Trump's lawyers tried to make the case that the original search warrant used for Mar-a-Lago in 2022, which was approved by the magistrate judge under Judge Cannon, was not valid and should be tossed out, along with more than 100 documents marked classified that were collected. Even more consequential was their other argument that all of those damning notes from Trump's lawyer, Evan Corcoran, that point out Trump's clear intent to obstruct justice and stalling on turning over those classified documents should also be tossed out under attorney-client privilege, even though a federal judge in Washington, D.C. already ruled that Corcoran's contemporaneous notes were admissible because of what is known as the crime fraud exception, that overrules attorney-client privilege if what was discussed was in pursuit of committing a crime, like, say, obstruction of justice. We've already seen what those notes look like throughout the indictment, where it refers to Trump attorney number one, who has been identified as Corcoran. There is this part where they're discussing what to do about the FBI's subpoena request for the classified documents. Quote, Trump, in sum and substance, made the following statements, among others, as memorialized by Trump attorney number one. A, I don't want anybody looking. I don't want anybody looking through my boxes. I really don't. I don't want you looking through my boxes. B, well, what happens if we just don't respond at all or don't play ball with them? C, wouldn't it be better if we just told them we didn't have anything here? And D, well, look, isn't it better if there are no documents? And then there's also this beauty when discussing what documents they should ultimately turn over. Quote, during that conversation, Trump made a plucking motion as memorialized by Trump attorney number one. He made a funny motion as though, well, OK, why don't you just take them with you to your hotel room? And if there's anything really bad in there, like, pluck it out. And that was the motion that he made. He didn't say that. No wonder Trump's lawyers want to get those thrown out. And that's just part of it. New reporting on those notes from ABC News, who said they have reviewed the records, claims to show that Trump privately expressed concerns that turning over those classified documents after receiving the subpoena could result in criminal charges, while Trump continued to try to get his lawyers to lie and destroy documents for his benefit. Quote, he raised a question as to if we gave them additional documents now, would they, the Department of Justice, come back and say, well, why did you withhold them, and try to use that as a basis for criminal liability or to make him look bad in the press, according to Corcoran's notes. And yet, with all of these matters having already been decided by other judges, Judge Cannon has again felt the need to burn through a lot of time on Trump's behalf. And today we are again no closer to beginning a trial that Trump knows he cannot win. Joining me now is Barbara McQuade, former U.S. attorney, professor at the University of Michigan Law School and MSNBC legal analyst, and Mary McCord, former acting assistant attorney general for national security and co-host of the Prosecuting Donald Trump podcast. Thank you, ladies, both for being here. I'm going to start with you, Mary, here at the table. Is there any world in which that search warrant is invalid? And can you imagine why a judge would hold an entire hearing on that question?
I don't think there's any world based on the arguments that were made. And actually, some of the reporting out of the courtroom does seem that Judge Cannon actually was also skeptical of Trump's arguments. He made arguments in two flavors. One was that he was entitled to what's called a Franks hearing, named after a case called Franks v. Delaware, that says if there are recklessly misleading facts or omissions, or not facts, recklessly misleading information or omissions in a search warrant, and if without those there would not have been probable cause, then the entire, the evidence seized as pursuant to the search warrant can be suppressed. And he wanted to have a hearing on that and hear from agents about that search warrant.
Sure.
But the things he said were reckless omissions, were things like not saying in the search warrant that within the FBI, there were some people that thought they should ask for consent rather than do a search warrant. So what?
Right.
That has nothing to do with probable cause.
Yeah.
Things like explaining in the search warrant that when he was president, he was held a top secret clearance, and he held clearances and was able to be briefed on top secret information at Mar-a-Lago. So what? This is all post-presidency. And the reporting I saw some from out of the courtroom is that Judge Cannon at one point sort of also said, so what? Aren't we now talking about post-presidency? So I do have some optimism on the search warrant question. The other basis was that it was too broad. It allowed for a search of too many places. And Judge Cannon at some point said, well, if nothing was seized from some of the places you think that were not particularized in the warrant, then what's your harm?
Right.
And
yeah.
He didn't really have a response.
As a response to that. And Barb, I mean, the things that Trump's lawyers seem to be bringing up are things like when they unpacked the boxes, they didn't put things back in the box exactly in the order they were in. If they were next to an old People magazine with Trump's face on the cover, it should have gone right back next to the People magazine. If they were next to some dirty drawers or a shirt in one of the other boxes where, again, classified documents shouldn't have been in the first place, well, if they didn't put it back next to the dirty drawers, then like those are the kind of arguments they were making. Is there any world in which that is a reasonable argument as to why a search should be thrown out?
No, and in fact, with regard to this particular argument, Joy, they're asking not just that the evidence be suppressed, but the whole case be dismissed, suggesting that there is something nefarious going on about all of this. No, this is an issue that certainly the defense can raise on cross-examination. I don't know why it would matter whether the classified document was before or after the Christmas card that he had saved from some fan who had written him. But, to the extent it suggests that perhaps it was hidden behind another document and it was difficult for him to see. I don't think that's going to square up with the other evidence that we have seen about the obstruction and some of the other things. But that's an argument that the defense can make at trial for the jury, but it's not a basis for suppressing the evidence in advance of trial.
And see, that is the at trial is the thing to me that is the key point there. These sound like the things that should be litigated as part of a case that's happening. It seems that Judge Aileen Cannon is interested in having all sorts of hearings about all sorts of ephemeral issues regarding whether or not the trial should ever happen at all. What she's not interested in doing is starting the trial.
Or ruling on some of the motions.
Right. She's just listening to them like she's sort of in judge school and like listening to all these interesting arguments and taking her time and then not deciding anything. Is there any way for Jack Smith's office to force her to start this trial?
Not really. I mean, the trial judge has control of their own calendar. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about will one of these opinions, if she ever issues a ruling, be appealable. And several that she heard these, in fact, everything she's heard these last 3 days, a negative decision would be appealable by Jack Smith. So if she were to dismiss the case on the grounds that the special counsel wasn't properly appointed under the Constitution, or if she were to dismiss it on the grounds that the funding for the special counsel doesn't come from the right bucket of funding, that would be appealable. If she were to deny the motion to modify the conditions of release to prevent Mr. Trump from saying things that cause a significant imminent risk of danger to law enforcement, they can appeal that. And if she were to suppress evidence pursuant to the suppression motion, and that includes Evan Corcoran's notes, that would also be appealable. So these all might give depending on the ruling, give the special counsel a chance to go up to the 11th Circuit and seek a reversal, which just depending on the circumstances may or may not be a chance for them to seek a recusal. People ask about that all the time. The government is loath to seek a recusal.
But Barb, you've had all this. I mean, the Wall Street Journal, for God's sakes, has got such new information about just how many doubts the judges, the senior judge in her same circuit had about her, whether she should stay on the case. And then you add to that dragging her feet. There has been this talk of a writ of mandamus. Like, could Jack Smith file such a writ and essentially demand that a court higher than her order the start to the trial? Is that something that you cannot see happening?
Not yet. I mean, it is a possibility because, one important consideration is that it is not just the defendant, but also the public that has a right to a speedy trial. Under the Federal Speedy Trial Act, while all these motions were pending, the clock was stopped. She now that she's held a hearing, 30 days to issue decisions on these. Now, there are provisions under even the Speedy Trial Act to extend that for issues of complexity, and in this kind of case, she probably could do that. But at some point, if she simply fails to rule on these motions or set a trial date, that could be a basis for seeking a writ of mandamus, which is really just a request for the higher court to say to the district judge, make a decision, do your job. The time has come. You can't wait anymore. Again, just as Mary said, the government is loath to request a recusal. I think the government is also loath to request a writ of mandamus. It is supposed to be granted under only rare circumstances. But at some point, that is a card that the government can play if the judge continues to delay in making decisions.
Key primaries are underway in New York, Utah, and Colorado, where Lauren Boebert is pushing pause on her multiple scandals to salvage her place in Congress. Last year, Boebert, who nearly lost in 2022, switched to a solidly Republican district on the opposite side of the state to boost her chances of staying in the House. Meanwhile, primary day in New York is coming to a close. Polls are open until 9 p.m. Eastern, and anyone who is in line by 9 will be allowed to cast their vote. So hurry up, New Yorkers. You still have time. All eyes are on the state's 16th congressional district, which covers parts of Westchester County and the Northeast Bronx. Representative Jamal Bowman is facing a well-funded challenge from Westchester County Executive George Latimer. It is the most expensive congressional primary in history, with almost $25 million raised and spent. It's also a bitter and divisive race, putting a spotlight on the Democratic Party's tensions around Gaza, as well as its divisions around race, wealth, and corporate greed.
I just feel like Bowman is just a little too aggressive. Like, I watch his rallies, I watch the way he's campaigned, and it's just always aggressiveness. I feel like when you're at a certain place in politics, you got to speak with a vocabulary that's deemed edible, like for all crowds. If it's kids, if it's old people, you got to speak with a vocabulary that's just like we can relate to. All the cursing, profanity, all the extraness, it's not needed because you're a man that's representing everyone.
I can tell that there's been a lot of money spent on this race. And it is important. It's very important, especially to Westchester County and the Northeast Bronx. We need money coming into the community to help the community out. We need housing, affordable housing. We need programs for the kids. We need summer programs, summer jobs.
Joining me now from Mount Vernon, New York, is NBC News correspondent Ali Vitale. Every time I hear Mount Vernon, I just want to say money earned in Mount Vernon. It's just a habit. Talk to me a little bit, Ali, about what you're hearing out there. What are you seeing? Is there energy that's visible for either candidate?
There's energy, but I have to say there's also a lot of reluctance. As I've been talking to voters out here, Joy, they are very much aware of the vitriol that has marked this race, and they're very much aware of the amount of eyeballs that are on this race, given the fact that $25 million have nearly been spent here on the airwaves. If you wanted to ignore this race, you basically cannot, because everywhere you go, every deli, every radio station is playing an ad that's either for or against Jamal Bowman or for or against George Latimer. It's an inescapable race, and that's why we're seeing people turn out. But I will say, as I've been standing out here today, and we've been out here since around 6:30 this morning, it has been a slow trickle. That's not to say there's not voters who aren't enthusiastic, but they're also pretty reluctant to share how they're voting because they know how tense it is and they don't want their neighbors to judge their choice. It is a really difficult one, and there's a lot of different dynamics at play.
Now, I know you've had a chance to talk to some people. I've been really enjoying all of your interviews. I know you've got some sound, so I'm going to throw that to you.
Well, we did get a chance to talk with Congressman Jamal Bowman about this, and I did speak with him and George Latimer over the weekend about what's governing this race. And I think what's so striking is that Bowman himself would point to AIPAC, would point to the stances that he's taken on things like Gaza as the reason that he has a challenger. His challenger says, though, that was only one of the reasons that he ultimately decided to get in this race. The other things that he pointed to were vulnerabilities that may explain why we're seeing the sheer amount of spending that we're seeing here in the first place. The fact that Bowman is one of the progressives that experts and operatives that I talked to, that you talked to, largely saw as vulnerable at the very start of this cycle. But I asked Bowman when I saw him here this evening, what the tension around this race has done to the community members who are voting in it, and why we're even seeing that reluctance when I'm just out here asking voters how they're voting and why. Listen to just a part of our conversation. Even as I've talked to voters, there are some who are like, I don't want to share who I voted for. I don't want my neighbors to know. It's gotten intense.
It's intense because AIPAC are bullies. AIPAC intimidates people. And my opponent has sided not just with AIPAC, but with Republican billionaires. And because he's been in office so long and because he's been county executive giving people jobs, people are afraid.
You hear Bowman there, again, turn the conversation back towards AIPAC, and it's something he did multiple times in our conversation. And look, we have to point out, AIPAC-aligned groups have spent over $14 million. They're responsible for the bulk of the cash that's been spent on the airwaves here. And most of those ads, although it's a group that is pro-Israel, most of those ads have actually been about the ways that Bowman has voted in Congress in ways that are divergent from the Biden administration. So it's not like those ads themselves are overtly focused on Israel and Gaza, but certainly that's an issue that voters themselves have surfaced here. I will add, there's one interesting piece of reporting that we picked up in about the last hour or so, and it's the fact that while Latimer himself has said, hey, if I lose here, I'm not running for this seat anymore, Bowman himself was asked just in the last hour or so, will you agree not to run with the Working Families Party or stay on the ballot in some kind of way? And he just simply dodged the question and instead just said, we're going to win. Which, of course, is the posture that candidates, you know this, take on election night, because optimism is the only way to get through it. But at the same time, it's something Latimer has made clear he's knocking down, and Bowman is very much not.
That is very interesting, because that was what I was going to actually ask you, is does this feel like a healable divide? Because it feels racial, it feels like regional in, you know, the Westchester folks versus the South Bronx folks. It's very different people, very different demographics. Does it feel like a healable rift as you're just talking to people?
I think actually the answer to that question is something that we've talked about in our reporting and our stories on this race overall, which is the fact that this feels in some ways like a 2016 redux. It's got different issues at play, but the fact that Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton are both key endorsers in this race on opposite sides just shows how long this rift within the Democratic Party has been going on, and the ways in which that divide after 2016 was healable. Okay, let's see if it's healable on a micro scale here in the 16th Congressional District of New York. But I think it's important to note, too, we're already starting to see seeds of doubt be sown, especially from members of the Justice Democrats who are trying to say, oh, well, Hakeem Jeffries and congressional leadership didn't do enough here, almost trying to breadcrumb a reason for Bowman's loss if he loses. These are the kind of things, Joy, that make divides really hard to heal.
Fascinating. Such a great reporter. NBC's Ali Vitale. We're so lucky to have you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn. MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.